Now we go. So this month, welcome to the book club. This month we discussed or we read Horse by Geraldine Brooks. It was an interesting book, and I'm going to sort of address that in a second. We do not have the author with us this month, and I really wished that we had her with us. I have a lot of questions for her, but we were not able to find a time on her calendar that aligned with ours. And then I think I had gone all the way to August or maybe July, and we just sort of said, you know what, we just are not going to be able to make this happen because the times that she was available, we weren't. And I think she was in Australia, or she's been in Australia for quite some time. And I think that's one of the reasons we were having issues as well. As you remember, when we had Sarah Ferguson speak to us from London, we were doing it at 11 o'clock in the morning because it was whatever time over there, 6 o'clock there. And so that would be just the opposite here. If we're doing it at 7 o'clock at night, and she's probably doing it at 6 a.m. in the morning or something like that. So we just had to have a tough time finding times. Before we get started, I just I never really do this, but I wanted to do it with this book. It's been a while since I read it. So I'm gonna be honest, my recall of everything, every little nuance of the book is gonna be a little slow because it was months ago when it was first recommended by a number of you that we should read this book. And I did so because many of you suggested it, and it's a great book. But I have to tell you, I was a little hesitant to select it. Oh, there's someone's coming in, hold on. Select it for this book club. And the reason is I try to sort of stay away from books where the author has a clear political message, agenda, what have you, that she's trying to articulate as part of the reading. That said, Booth, Karen Joy Fowler, had a very similar, sort of stance. But I thought that the story of Booth, and so the insight into his family and that dynamic, and of course the Lincoln White House and all that really interesting stuff that was going on, was worth it in that case. And I felt the same way about this one. I felt that the story of this horse Lexington, the true story of that, and Geraldine Brooks's well-researched writing of the horses, owners of Henry Lewis, of Thomas Scott, was amazing. And how the racehorses were treated, all that stuff that we're going to talk about tonight, I think was really important for us to read, and I really enjoyed it. And she's a well-written author; she writes extremely, extremely well. But that said, there are some the bold reality of the antebellum South was clear in this book, and I appreciated her writing about that because it's a true story and it's one that needs to be told. I will say that I did struggle a bit with the current story, and I think it did rob Gordon Burnett, who was the guy who did find that portrait of the horse in Kentucky on a curbside that a neighbor had thrown away. I think he worked at a plant at the University of some physical plant within the University of Kentucky, and I felt that maybe that would have been a better way to have addressed it, but that's her choice. It's her book, and we're going to talk about this as we go. But what I am going to ask as we get started is that when we discuss the story tonight, we discuss the characters, we discuss the writing, what makes this such a good book, that we not delve into the politics. Yes, we are going to discuss, the author's take on certain things, but I would ask us all to keep whatever political, viewpoint that you're coming from, whether you have one or not, doesn't really matter. We're just going to keep those on the sideline and really discuss this book for what it is. And I think we all know each other well enough. We've been enough of these reviews of these book club meetings, I think, to do that. But I just think we need to be respectful because, particularly with the news today, and I just don't want to get into any of that. But I do think we need to be mindful that we've got a lot of divide in this country already, and I really don't want our discussion of this book to kind of push any of that into our wonderful, great book club meetings. So with that said, and I don't want to get anybody upset or anything anyway or there, I think it's a great idea to discuss this book because I think it's an incredible story. And the way that Blacks were treated in the antebellum South, she does a wonderful job of depicting that. The way the horses were treated, oh my God, and the characters that we will be discussing tonight. I think she did an outstanding job, particularly with the historical piece of bringing those folks to life. So with that said, I would like to start with a poll, and then we can get into the discussion, because I'm going to ask you, who was your favorite character, the character that you empathized with or that touched you emotionally the most? You didn't have to necessarily like them, but how did you, I say favorite character, but which story really, resonated best with you? And then I want to discuss sort of why that was, or what it was about that person's arc that was so compelling, and where they were when we started reading about them in the story, and then where we ended, how they had grown or not grown, depending on the character that we pick, or the story, the person that you resonated with. So you and me and my polls, we're going to start with that to get us off to a great start. So I got to launch this thing. Hold on. So can you guys see this?
Yeah.
Okay. So who was your favorite? I use the word favorite loosely, but which character, did you empathize with most, or did you feel closest to, or that you felt, that really his message or her message really came forward to you? Here we go. 18 of 25. 22. All right. I'm going to close it here because we're 22 of 25. And if you guys didn't all read the book or didn't have a favorite or don't want to play, that's fine too. Okay. And poll. You want to see? I'm not surprised. 73% of you share results. Can you see that? So 73% of you, as did I, really related to Jarrett Lewis, and we'll talk about him. A couple of you, 3 of you, really found the Jess character to be really compelling and your favorite, and then 3, of course, on Theo. No one liked poor old Thomas Scott, the artist who, brought these horses to life on canvas. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to go to discussion. So someone want to give me what it is about Lewis, about Jarrett, that you were so impressed with. Who's going to go first? Teresa, you got your arm up? Looks like it. Can't hear you though.
Sorry, I can't find the unmute button either. I really like Jarrett because even at his own personal risk, he really stood up for the horse. He just seemed like he had a great moral compass and good sense of what is right and wrong, and just was loyal to the horse, to everybody he came into contact with. And I really liked him, and I really loved the book. I also agree with you, Sharon, about the politics of it. And I just thought it was fascinating. In my neighborhood, all of the streets, or most of them, I think maybe 1 or 2 or not, are named after horses that have been either Triple Crown winners, or the one on my street is just one too. But it was fascinating to go and look at Lexington's, I guess you'd say descendants, or
Progeny.
all of his
progeny or something. I don't know. They got a new name. They have a name for it. Like I said, yeah.
I know I'm using the wrong one, but
I'm sure we all are lineage or something.
But it was interesting to see how many of his, offspring really went on and were successful. And I just found it fascinating too, about the skeleton. And I liked the photographer too. He just wasn't, a major part of it. So.
Okay. Eileen.
Yeah, I really like Jarrett because I thought no matter what happened, he stayed true to his belief in protecting the horse. I mean, he was there when he was born. He felt that the horse, he felt a real connection with the horse, and obviously the horse felt the same connection with him. And I just love the fact that no matter how difficult it was, he was going to remain true to his conviction that he was there for the horse.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Miriam.
So I lied on the poll. You didn't give us, we love all the characters. I really liked this book, and I found all the characters really interesting. And since I read it like 3 months ago, I had no idea who any of the people were. The photographer, the artist, was a really interesting character.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I just found the whole story compelling. I learned so much from her book. So each one of them to me had a positive quality to, adding the dimension to the story. And I happen to like the historical fiction with multiple plots and perspectives. So I'm gonna give it all 4, and you can change your whole.
Okay, before you go away though, Miriam, I'm
Okay.
going to ask you on this. And you're my favorite person to ask this next to Jean.
Yeah.
And that is, did the 5 points of view and the back and forth with the 5, did it throw you sometimes?
She probably could have written a chronologically straight story, right? Just kind of started at the beginning and then come to the end and done it all in one path. But I think because I read People of the Book, which looked at the Haggadah and was forward in time and went back in time, I think that didn't bother me that much.
Okay.
So she could have picked either one. I think I also read an arc, so sometimes it's hard to know if there were
Okay.
reviews, if there was something going on, like more time showed you how the jumps were occurring. So that's always, the jumps are always an issue. But she could have done it either way. I actually thought she was going to go, from the past and then from the present and go backwards, which she kind of did.
The Martha Jackson, I think the Martha Jackson point of view kind of threw me in a little bit of this, because it sort of came in sort of from the side, and I was like, wait a minute. It took me a bit to sort of adjust to, when she came into the story.
Oh, is that the anthropologist who's looking at the horses?
No, that's
structural.
Martha Jackson was I think it's Martha Jackson. She was the art curator person that
At the Smithsonian.
No. She was Jackson Pollock in New York. She was the one that sold her convertible to Jackson Pollock, who crashed it, and then she's the one that got, which painting was it? One of the paintings, because her mother had died on the horse. And it was from the same lineage as, or whatever it is, the trees, and I can't remember what it's called, of Lexington. That one, I don't think it is. That kind of caught me off, and I had a hard time recovering from it. But once I got into it, I was okay. It just took
Well,
me.
as I said, I read the book as it came out, so it's been a little while.
Right.
All the people, but I guess I'm a Geraldine Brooks fan, kind of thought that, I think, when you look at the stories with the multiple plots, you have to decide how much the jumping back and forth is going to bother you. And I think she does a pretty good job of that, but I was surprised it didn't do just like 2 straight lines, present and then past, and kind of coming forward. She did have that subplot going on in there, and I think that skews the story, but it added a lot of background that I didn't know anything about.
Right. There's
About the
so much
articulated
information in this book. It was like, a lot. It was great in terms of
And
the
I'm
learning.
sorry I didn't get a chance to read it a second time, because I think that would have really helped.
Second time. Yeah, right.
Yeah, like I got time to read a second.
I spent the day going through it really quickly again, because like you had, it was been a couple months since I read it and I forget. So Sarah.
I wanted to piggyback on the comment that Jared stayed true to himself. And I appreciated that he put so much energy into his self-awareness. And it was important for him to regulate his emotions, and that he really worked on that.
Okay. I have some comments I'm going to make about both Jarrett and Theo once we get through them a little bit. I think I want to get some reaction if you think I'm crazy as to how I read the symbolism on this, but that's part of the thing about staying true to himself, et cetera. I really appreciate about the Jarrett character. Pauline.
Yeah, so I'm with you with respect to the whole Jackson Pollock thing. It came out of left field. I was like, what is this?
A little bit.
So that aside, I looked at it, the horse was the primary theme, but the secondary theme I thought was how racism has changed from this overt, you're black, you're less than me, to, oh my God, I can't believe I've just offended you because I thought my bike was your bike. And because you're Black, I have committed a major sin. And that to me was the story. It's just like understanding where we were and where we are now. I don't know. That was to me a timeline that I just like, gosh, look where we've come. I'm not sure we're in the right place, but the pendulum has swung too far left and then it's swung too far right. And we're still not where the pendulum should be, where people are just people.
Well, that interesting comment about the bike. I got to tell you, when I read it, I was like, wait a minute. If some dude, I don't care what he is messing with what I think's my bike, I'm going to hit him in the head and say, hey, I don't care if you're black, white, purple, or pink. I mean, so I think it was I think she could have used a better, I mean, if Geraldine Brooks was trying to make that point, I think she could have done found a different example that would have been maybe more appropriate, because I just didn't feel that necessarily worked there, but maybe I'm just being confused, which I can be.
Did she write this book after the event that happened with the bird thing that happened in Central Park? You know what I'm talking about, that story?
Yeah, I don't know. Her husband died which is really very sad, in end of May of 2019. And she was on a book tour with one of her other books. And so I think she finished this, or she wrote this during the pandemic. I think, yeah, I'm saying yes. So I think, it's the George Floyd thing that may have motivated some of this. I don't know if the Central Park thing had anything to do with it, but that's my guess.
Yeah, that
I wish she was here. I had a lot of questions for her.
It was, again, that just resonated with me, just like that whole thing with the dog being off leash when the bird.
Right, it could have been.
We all saw that story. Yeah, we all saw that story. So that's just curious to me.
Right. Can I have someone speak up about Theo, who liked Theo? Because I want to make a point about Theo and Jared. Who's got a Theo? Who was a Theo? Who voted for Theo? You did, Teresa? Okay. No, you didn't. Okay. Who did? Come on. Don't be shy. All right.
I didn't vote for him, but I actually didn't like him because I thought he felt that he was a victim. And I think that it held him back. And I felt in 2019, despite of what goes on, I think that Jared had a much tougher life and handled his life with much more grace and acceptance. And he was a happier person. And he found joy and accomplishment despite being a slave and despite being held back. And Theo had a lot of opportunities, and I think he didn't take advantage of them, and he felt he was a victim. So I didn't like him for that reason. So I didn't vote for him. I voted for Jared. And I just wanted to say I like the way Jared grew up throughout this book. We met him when he was young, maybe 14 or 13, or maybe even younger when and it was just nice to see his development, and he lived with a lot of challenges, but yet he found joy. And that was like a very uplifting, although I don't think he was treated as bad by everybody. I think that he also had some good people in his life. And I think he just continued to grow up, and he ended up doing fairly well in Canada. So I hope they spoil us. Everyone is, we can mention that, right? So for that reason, I like Jared, because with his so many legitimate challenges, he faced life with so much more grace and strength and joy, actually. And Theo had a lot of opportunities, and I think he was just not, he felt he was a victim.
And on that note, I think that if you look at sort of Jared's role model. I mean, you mentioned, his father was, was one, and it was heartbreaking when when we found out that his father died. He wasn't informed. It's just crazy. Yeah. But the barber, and I can't remember his name. It's been a while. But the barber in Natchez or wherever it was that had all the polished furniture and all the cool stuff, and how could a Black man have all that? I mean, he looked up to that, and so I think he had this sort of goal, if you will, right? Of I can. Everyone's telling me I can't, you're not allowed to, but there's an example of someone who did, and I can too. I think that was part of his inner soul or his inner voice. And I think we saw that more than we heard it in terms of the way he behaved and that inner grace as you described, Jane. Yeah. Christine, are you up? We can't hear you, Christine. Sorry, hon. I hate this, but yes, yes.
Never decide whether the little red line means I'm muted or unmuted, but nonetheless, I hope you can hear it now.
We got you.
Jared, I thought, had an advantage over Theo in that Jared knew his place. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just that Jared knew what was expected of him in dealing with white people. And he was always very careful. I read this book a while ago myself, but I just took another look at it before coming on to this. And at the very beginning, when Jared met the painter asked him, tell me about this particular horse. What's he like? And so he gave him about a 6-word reply. And the painter says, no, that's not what I meant. So Jared says, to himself, damn it, just talking to a white man, I said 6 words and I've already offended him. So he had to go back and rework it. But until he got older, I don't believe he was willing to rock the boat in any way. Although you might remember from the very beginning, he always knew that his father had bought his freedom. So in his mind, he knew that saving and buying your freedom was at least a possibility. So then you come forward to Theo, and yes, he does have, I think, a bit of a people are out to get me, I'm a victim mentality. But Theo probably felt that every white person he met was a bit of a mystery. How do I react with this one? How do I treat this one? How friendly can I be? How polite should I be? I think in some ways his situation was a bit more difficult. But I don't want to deny that what Jared did was really pretty exceptional for his time. And I was extremely happy to get to the end of the book and read about his eventual success and his satisfaction with the way his life had gone. So I liked Theo, I did. In fact, I liked all the characters to some degree or other, but I thought Jared was the one who was fleshed out the most. And I was glad that the author spent so much time with him.
I want to, there was a line I wrote down when you talk about Jared, and I think it sort of describes what we are all kind of talking around about that character. And it's a line where I think Scott's the one that said it, Thomas Scott. A racehorse is a mirror where a man sees his own reflection. And it was really early in the book where when Thomas was talking to Jared about the horse and tell me of the horse, etc. And when he says that, I think Jared took that to heart and said, this is a champion. This racehorse is a champion. And I am going to see myself. I'm going to make him a champion because it's going to reflect on me. That sort of a mirror in which you see yourself, that reflection. And I think that is kind of the character arc that we see that the author put Jared on, is that, reflecting that, the suffering of that horse as well as the determination to win and the determination to overcome. That's sort of my take. Teresa?
I really liked Theo, and I didn't really see him as a victim. I saw him more as, I believe his family had lived in South Africa and then in England. And I think
Australia.
that was it Australia?
Australia, I think it was Australia.
Okay, I kind of got the feeling that in those different places, maybe he had experienced, more, racism maybe, or whatever. So I think that it was more of an internal struggle with him than really what he had to deal with, except for, unfortunately, the way he died, when it was just assumed because the way she wrote it, that because he was Black, he was, was hurting this woman as opposed to helping her. But that's kind of how I saw him. I thought it was really his upbringing, that had kind of.
His mother was Nigerian. That's what it was. His mother was from Africa. That's what it was.
Right. Okay. For some reason, I thought that they
Something
were
like
in
that.
South Africa, and I thought that maybe he met with some kind of discrimination when he was playing polo.
Polo, yeah.
Yeah, and so I kind of think it's like was probably just saying, oh, were they thinking or judging me just because I'm Black? Or are they looking at this, for some other reason? But I did really like him. I thought he was admirable and smart. And I was sorry that he died the way he did
Yeah.
in the book.
Laura?
Well, I was the one who voted for him.
Okay,
Sorry, I didn't respond.
that's okay.
I was
I'm
having
quick
dinner.
sometimes.
I was having dinner. I think he represents how far we've come, and that is not that far. That he was an educated, smart man. He was walking his dog, and he met with his end. And I think it played a big part that he was Black, that he was shot. So I think it shows how far we've come and not that far. I don't know how else to say it.
Well, interesting. So I have a sort of a different sort of take. And maybe I'm misreading what she did, but let me just put this out there. And she being the author, being Geraldine Brooks. Okay. So if you take a look let's just look at Jared for a second. Okay. I'm just I got my notes here. I'm just going to read it from him a little bit if I can even read what I'm saying. He experienced so much bigotry and so much, evil and discrimination. He's enslaved. We can go into all that, right? Unfair treatment. Yet he managed to, keep that grace about him and that pure heart, and he rose above it. And at the end, right, he is moving on to Canada, and which we're, and Rita, our Canadian here on the phone, that's the brighter future for him. That's where he's going to find, his trophy, his goal. And the painting of that horse, him finding it, buying it back, and taking it back with him to Canada, symbolizes that for me, that hope, that reflection of the horse, seeing the reflection of what can be and what a champion looks like and feels like. And he wants that in his home to carry into his, into his family and his life forever. And it's never going to be in the public domain because it's personal to him and his family. Whereas if you take a look at Theo couldn't rise above his feelings, right, of being discriminated against. And that it was, it was the thing, honestly, in the end, maybe his fear, or I'm not quite sure, but she killed him off. I mean, this is not a real story, right? I mean, Theo is not a real person, whereas, and it's what killed him, right? That the racism is what killed him, whereas, Jared rose above it in some way. And when you look at the painting, he gave it away. Theo gave it away, didn't see the reflection of the greater self of what he could be in the painting of the horse. He gave it away. And it symbolized, that he didn't cherish that reflection. He didn't sort of get it. Now I'm kind of rough around it. I'd love to have the author to talk about it, but that's kind of where I was thinking this was going. I mean, she made a decision to kill off the Theo character, because he was a tragic character in a lot of ways. He couldn't see the good. He couldn't get there. And he died from it. How about that? He died from it. Not of his own fault, but he died from it. Whereas she didn't kill off Jared, and he does, quote, live happily ever after, whatever that looks like, with his painting of his horse that kind of goes into, quiet epiphany with him. So that was just sort of my thinking in terms of how she used those paintings and the way she handled it. And of course, the one painting did end up in the museum, in real life, that was found in a trash heap, and was saved by Gordon Burnett, whose story I really would have loved to have heard. I think Kristen Rock, you're next, Kristen.
So I actually thought that him giving the painting back to the widow was absolutely like a very selfless act. I didn't see it as a reflection on anything, just that he was willing to forgive and move past people who were still ignorant about race, who were maybe still prejudiced and living in this modern time, that he was just able to say, you know what, this is the right thing to do, that he was also being a good and moral character, kind of like we said, Jared was. So,
Well, in that point though, he could have given it to the museum though, since it was in his possession. He could have done something different with it, is my
Mhm.
point. What I found interesting though, the way she wrote this character, which is something I wouldn't have expected. The woman who donated it to the museum or in Kentucky dedicated it to Jarrett's memory, which I thought was interesting. I didn't expect to see that. Didn't make a big deal of it, but it was done that way. I thought was interesting aside. Janet.
So it's been a while since I read the book, and so a lot of these details are only just coming back and you're talking about them. But I didn't dislike Theo. I don't know. I think that there had to be a reason that she had to kill him off, just to make him be sort of like the
Martyr.
the opposite, like the foil for how elevated Jarrett had become. And I really like the Jarrett character, and I do think that he grew exponentially given his time. But then again, when you think about how if Theo was living in the 21st century, and he and all these other people like him, just can't even be who they are, just can't even be a human being without getting murdered. That's, I think, the point that was being made there. And not that he was kind of like a selfish and silly and I didn't get that about him. So I think that the main whole idea was about Jarrett and the horse and the times that he had to endure to keep that horse safe. I personally despise horse racing for a lot of reasons. My father was a gambler, and the horses are dying daily, and even just in California at Golden Gate Racetrack. So that's the part of the book that I really didn't like is the treatment of the horse. So I don't know, that's my feeling. I thought it was a really, really, really good book. And I think she did an excellent job, and however it went back and forth, those kinds of things don't seem to bother me as much as they seem to bother other people. And so I just thought the book was excellent, and she did a great job writing it.
Yeah.
Miriam?
I want to kind of play off of what Janet just said. So the horse racing, to me, I found that part fascinating.
Me too.
Good or bad, whether, of course, we were also hearing recently about the horses who were dying because of the way they're being bred. But what I found fascinating was the importance of horse racing to society, how it was an activity. I mean, I've only been a couple of times to the horse races, took a couple bucks and had a good time. But I thought it was really interesting to see how the horse racing was integrated into a kind of a weird segment of society in the 19th century, and how maybe important it was, how it becomes prominent as an activity, a sport, and then where its role is today, because we don't hear much about it except for the couple of races. So I just thought it was really interesting. Also, having read Elizabeth Lett's couple of books on horses, I don't know if you've read any of them, but I just guess I find these horses really interesting to learn about. And Geraldine Brooks did that for me. She taught me about horse racing and its history and its significance, and those are the other kinds of things I get out of the book. Sometimes I think the other messages get lost.
Well, I tell you, when you live in a community, we're in horse country here, in the this part of Virginia,
Right.
And so there's it's a way of life for many people. I mean, as in like it's all they do. I mean, this is,
Right.
and if you've been to, I have been to the Kentucky Derby. And those people are, insane when it comes to their horses, and their horse farms and their trainers. And I, if you've watched any of those, Seabiscuit, or what was the other one? There's been a number of them, and you just see, how the people have, the animals are treated and the people are treated, and the ones that don't make it, they get shipped off. It's just and she brought a lot of that to life, and it's still a big part of many communities. And so I thought that was fascinating as well. I really did.
There's a couple of really good, it's a really good movie that's older called Far Lap, about this horse that could carry like tons of weight, and how they kept putting extra weight on his saddle. It's a superb movie, if you can find it, called Far Lap with PH. The other book that's
Secretariat
really,
also, I think Teresa put up Secretariat. I forgot about that one.
yeah,
It's a great movie.
War
Horse.
and
War
War
Horse.
Horse. That's also fascinating. There's an interesting book by Elizabeth Letts, who's written a couple of books about horses. She wrote one of it called The $80 Horse, which is a horse that could just jump. This is really amazing horse who actually trained near where I grew up. I think there's a lot of books out there that show you, other than the gambling, show you how the industry works and what goes on in the industry, good, bad, and ugly, positive.
Is
just
her
kinda
work historical fiction?
Yes. So no, $80 Horse is real. There's another book she wrote called The Perfect Horse, which is about a Nazi campaign to kill off all the white horses. I want to say they're the Lipizzanos in Germany. Janice going, yes. Also another book by Letts. And then the third one that just came out recently is called The Ride of Her Life, about the 62-year-old woman, 63-year-old woman, that would have been me when I read the book, who takes her horse in 1954 and she walks her horse across the country. And it's fascinating. It's all about horses and about roads and society, and how society is shifting from horses to interstates. So there's kind of a lot out there if you want to read something that's completely different from horse racing.
Got it. Christine.
Yes, I had my hand raised. I have a horse, and I don't race her by any stretch, and I don't follow horse racing, but I was very interested in horse because of my love of the animal. During the time of Lexington, horses were raced longer and harder by far than they are today. They did heat races where the horses would typically run 2, 3, 4, even 5 miles, rest for a while, and then go out and do it again. Nowadays, horse racing is all about speed, not so much about endurance. And so horses are being raced when they are younger and younger. One of the articles I read about thoroughbred racing happened to mention that horses are not physically mature until they're 6. And yet here in the United States, we have horses racing as 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds and so on. So unfortunately, I think that the thoroughbred racing industry is just about money and getting a quick return on their money. However, with regards to Elizabeth Letts, the books that you brought up, I've read all of hers, and she does a ton of research. The $80 Champion was about a show jumper called Snowman. The Perfect Horse was indeed about efforts to save the Lipizzan breed during World War II. And just recently, I finished the book about Annie, whose last name I don't remember at the moment, who did indeed ride from Maine to California and appeared on the Art Linkletter show many, many years ago to discuss what she had done. And I've also seen the movie Far Lap as well. So there's a lot of stuff out there if you're interested in horses. And I think all of these things would be interested in people who don't even know anything about horses. They're just great books and great movies, and you would like them all. There are many people today who believe that horses are being raced far too young, far too early, and are not being bred for soundness. And so therefore, that's why they're getting injured on the track. But that's a whole gigantic topic that I'm certainly not qualified to discuss, and probably the subject for much better people than I. But Lexington raced, I read some little tidbit about him that he raced until he was 18 years old. Now, I can't remember where I read it, but that's a phenomenal career on the track for any horse to still be racing at that age. And it would never happen today. Not at all.
Interesting.
And then how many he sired, right? I mean, was it, there were, he was 900 some covers and 500, 500, 500, 600, 500, 600 actual foals he sired. I mean, it's a pretty amazing, you know, many of these horses today have bloodlines back to him. So it's kind of crazy.
Well, to think that he sired that many horses is amazing, because this is in the day when you actually had to travel with the mare to get her together with the stallion. You couldn't fly her there. You couldn't truck her there. She had to go by train or on her own 4 feet in order to get there. So breeding opportunities were a lot more limited in his time.
That's an interesting thought too. Wow. Teresa.
I thought that his career was much, much shorter than that because of his vision. That's not true?
I can't remember where I read that little tidbit about racing until he was 18, because I sort of remember that he started going blind when he was about 11 or 12. So,
Oh,
you know,
I thought he stopped racing sooner than that.
rising, but I don't know. I'd have to do a little more research.
Okay, I'll look too, because I really thought that, because I think he lived until he was like 25, but I thought he was done racing maybe before he was 10, but I might be confused.
Well,
with
we got to
something.
look at Jared's age of the book too. I think that's how we could maybe unwind some of that, maybe.
Look at what?
Jared's age, because remember, Jared, well, maybe, I hope she is true. Jared was 13 when he was delivered. So he was in his 30s, maybe, when he came back from Canada in 1875. I'm trying to remember the dates. I haven't, it's been a while.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to do the math. That would have put him in his 30s, I think, or 33 or 40. So maybe the timeline's somewhere in there.
I don't know. I'm gonna look it up.
Okay.
Might have just been my misconception. That's a long career, 17 years.
So did, back to the characters really quick. Jess and what was her name? Maybell or May something or another? What was her name? Oh gosh, Mary Barr. Sorry, a minute.
Oh, Mary Barr. Yeah.
Yeah. Did anybody else besides me see that sort of parallel between the Jess character and the Mary Barr character? In terms of the way Theo had reacted and interacted with Jess. And there was a line in there, something about, oh gosh, she's super smart, but she's super clueless or something like that, he had said. And then it was sort of juxtaposed with Mary Barr, who was being pretty super clueless in a lot of ways, you know, hey, take the horse and run. Yeah, and by the way, you might get shot, you know, where's your thinking, and telling him to do this. And so I saw a lot of parallels between the way she put those two characters in the lives of Theo, she being the author, in the lives of Theo and in the lives of Theo and Jared, in terms of that sort of foil, that female clueless, you know, person that sort of reflected the naivete and the ignorance in a lot of ways of, you know, they were trying to be helpful, but they also were, you know, not being terribly helpful. They're being more obtuse in a sense. Eileen?
Yeah, I could understand that with Mary Barr because she was young and she didn't seem to see that there was a real difference between her and Jared. So she was like, well, just go away. Just, you know, you can do it. You know, the horse can take you. But of course, she doesn't understand. She's only a child. She doesn't understand what the ramifications of him running away would be. Whereas with Jess, I tend to get these names confused in my head. I mean, she's an intelligent woman. She's a scholar. She's someone well respected in her field. She's not a naive little kid who doesn't understand what she's saying. So in a lot of ways, I didn't think that she was treated fairly. I thought that the author portrayed her in a way that did make her seem a little clueless, a little stupid at times. I was like, come on. I mean, this woman is tops in her field. This is not a stupid woman in any way, shape, or form. She's lived in Australia. She's lived in London. She's lived in America. I mean, this is someone who's experienced in the world as well as being intelligent. So to make her clueless about certain things, I didn't think was fair. You know, just like with Theo, Theo had tons of opportunities that most people would die for. He lived in lots of different places. He had parents who were diplomats, obviously well respected in their country as well as other countries where they wouldn't have stayed as diplomats. And he was sent to the best schools. He had many, many more opportunities than a lot of people had. And yet he still played the part of being an abused person, which I thought was maybe naive on his part. Maybe he should have been able to rise above that, because guys on the hockey team or the polo team called him names or called him derogatory terms. He couldn't rise above that. Coming from the background that he did, I would have thought that he should have been above that kind of bullying.
And sometimes I wonder, Eileen, if, and I, like I said, I wish Geraldine was here, we could have asked her, if she did this deliberately in a way that we would all say, listen, put your big boy panties on or whatever, that's what I would have said to my kids, come on, boys, stop it, stop being that victim. But yet the thing that we all through most of the book said, he's just being a victim. He's just overthinking this. And then the thing that we all thought he was overthinking is the thing that actually got him killed. At least from the way she's written this. And so maybe that was her intent, her being Geraldine Brooks, it's one of those, because I too felt like, come on, stop it. You're looking for it. I'll tell you something I told my kids, my boys, if you're looking for white cars, you're going to see one at every corner. And he struck me as a kind of guy that was always looking for the white car, looking for it. But yet again, at the end, it was shown in how she ended the book that he had reason to fear.
But I think I would have felt much more sympathetic towards him in the way he did die, because yes, that was totally.
If he wasn't so whiny about it, right?
Yeah, exactly. If he didn't, even when she approached him and thought that he was taking her bike, which is a perfectly logical assumption since they were identical bikes and they were parked in practically the same spot, and he gets himself all in this like not about, it's because I'm a black man. I wouldn't care if it was a white guy or a black guy. If somebody was stealing my bike, I would get pissed off.
Yeah, right.
But he immediately said, no, it's because I'm black that she's getting pissed off that I'm stealing her bike. And even when he realized, oh no, she's got the exact same bike, it wasn't like he thought, you're being stupid, Theo. It wasn't because you're black, it's just because she has the exact same bike. He didn't acknowledge that part.
Right. Well, and then there's some of her choices of words. I wrote this down today too. I think when Jess apologized for her mistaking that he was stealing her bike when he wasn't. She used the word, I was horrified that I said that. And he was like, wait a minute, why are you're horrified? You're horrified at your behavior, as opposed to feeling bad for me. So it was the word choices were interesting too. There's a lot of, very interesting dialogue that led, that actually I think really sort of triggered him and her in both ways. So interesting observations.
Maybe even when the cops saw him with the woman who was injured, I don't know if she was dead or not. I don't think we ever found out.
I don't think she was, no. She wasn't, I don't think.
But he could have yelled to the cop, this woman needs help. She's injured.
Well, but that.
Okay. Good, Jane.
Okay, so I think that would have I think that Geraldine Brooks did a wonderful job portraying the past, and she did a fabulous job. But I think that the present, I think she was forcing a political issue, and I know we're not supposed to talk politics, but I think that she forced, all the characters were just much too forced, where Jess was too, embarrassed about insulting the black guy, and Theo was too, couldn't get over that, he was called names, and the things. So even the way she killed him off, or he was killed, I think she was trying to show that things have not changed so much today. That, you know, we still have so much far to go, and that whites don't know how to act properly, and blacks, you know. And I think that the whole present was a little forced, and I think she lost a little bit of my interest in it, although it was beautiful. The book, I love the book, and I think every character was meant to be there. You know, even the small characters we haven't discussed yet, but I thought that the present was a little bit off for me and a little bit forced for every character. So,
And I think we can agree to disagree if we have to on that, you know, just because of, you know, where it's going to take us. But I get exactly what you're saying, because I felt some of those same messages as well, but it doesn't mean that everyone else in the room did. So
it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be spoken about, but
Exactly.
I felt that it was too much. And then the fact that he got killed, you know, that the cops shot him. And yes, these things do happen, but you know what? He was a smart, intelligent man. He could have yelled out to the cops, "I need help," but he didn't. And so it was just another, it was part of the story that.
And that part's the fiction part, right? This is the
Right,
whole,
yes,
this
so he
current,
was
that's the whole
very-
fiction piece,
so
as
the-
opposed to a lot of the.
I think that the current was a little too much, you know, telling us about how, you know, life is today. We haven't come far enough yet to make good changes. So.
Jean?
I think one of the things that dawned on me about his character almost from the beginning when he was showed up in the book was that I felt like I couldn't figure out whether he was stuck in his victimhood or stuck in his entitlement. There was kind of there was a little bit of both for me. Like on one hand, as you said, he grew up going to these really, you know, he grew up with these, you know, well-to-do, well-respected parents, and he went to these incredible boarding schools, and they weren't always successful places for him, but he was in a very entitled environment. But he kind of vacillated, you know, on one hand, he had that victim mentality, and he always had that defense that people were looking at him for the wrong reasons, as opposed to seeing his educated side. But then he goes and meets with his dissertation advisor, and she starts telling him about his research and how he needs to change his topic and do all of these different things. And he's automatically angered, although he swears that she's the most incredible person in the field, but he's angered that she would actually tell him that he needed to change what he was doing or look at it differently. So it was almost as though he expected to go in and have her say, "This is fantastic. You don't need to change anything. It's the best thing I've ever read."
Right.
So he was really surprised when she did exactly what her job is supposed to be, which is call him out and say, "No, this isn't a good study. This needs to be changed. You need to do some other things, and you need to do some research and, you know, whatever." So he had this vacillation for me. And there were times where I would read something and I'd think, "Oh, we're back to the other side." You know, like it's just like we were rolling back and forth. But I think those two pieces were never reconciled for him.
Interesting. I had, you know, when you said that, because there was something that was sort of bothering me about the character, and I kept going back to, how many of you guys have watched The Crown? I haven't watched all of it, but I've watched a good bit of it. And when Prince Charles was in one of those schools where he's being bullied and victimized, and he's between that same place. He's an entitled kid in an entitled school, being bullied and being the victim, you know, and so, although he wasn't quite as victim-y as Theo was, but it's an interesting analogy, right? That's really good. Thank you, Jean, for that.
You're welcome.
All right, Nancy, you just came on and then you didn't come on. So you have a comment?
I didn't like the character at all because I thought he was an entitled brat. I didn't want him to die, but I found I just couldn't have any empathy for him at all. So that when you came up with the fact that that the character flip-flopped, I hadn't pinpointed that part, but I do agree that entitlement with a capital E was what I think of him.
I had one more sort of interesting oversight or insight that I just sort of came up with, and I don't know if how you guys are going to feel about this, but there was a line in there. It had to do with Theo's dissertation. I think, Jean, we just mentioned that he's working on his dissertation, and his thesis or whatever it is. And he talks about this reference to, and I'm gonna really butcher this because it's been a while since I read it, but Frederick Douglass's declaration that, you know, white folks can't or never paint, white artists never painted Black people, right? That they would never, and they could never interpret them, they could never do it. Something that Frederick Douglass had written, and he was going to explore that. That was part of what his thesis was, or dissertation was going to be. And when he finds this portrait that was painted by Thomas Scott, well, I think it's Henry that was in the painting, the father. And, you know, it really causes Theo to sort of, you know, question, you know, whether, you know, Thomas Scott was an exception. Could he actually write about, I mean, could he actually paint it, Black folks, and represent them well? Because he was so impressed with the way Henry looked and the way that Henry appeared, you know, and that was, you know, intriguing to him. Or was it something else that was he missing it? Was he just copying it or something? And so I was reading that and I was thinking, well, this is kind of interesting, because here we have this being written by, you know, Geraldine Brooks, who's a white woman, and trying to tell us about, you know, this very complicated story about how, you know, Black Americans feel, how Theo felt, how Henry, how Jared, how all these folks. And do you think that she's, this is just sort of, you know, just put it out there. Do you think Geraldine's trying to tell us with the way when she did put that in there about Frederick Douglass, is she comparing herself to Thomas Scott? That, you know, she can write this, or is she, you know, questioning her position in writing this story? Or do you think she's making an issue at all, and I'm just out of my mind, and I'm just, you know, I'm making, you know, mountains out of you know, marbles. Any thoughts about, you know, having her write this story like this? I mean, she's taken on some pretty controversial and big topics in the past as well, so this would not surprise me. But I thought that was an interesting sort of take on this fictional character Theo, talking about Frederick Douglass and a feeling about, you know, white artists painting Black men of that era. No thoughts? Yes, Christine. You gotta put you on mute. You're on mute. Sorry.
I think in part she's trying to describe her adopted son from Nigeria's point of view. She mentions in the afterward that Bijou had a prominent part in describing his feelings. And I think she wants to acknowledge that for him. But I also did some homework on her because we weren't going to have her. And I saw a book discussion that she had at the National Book Festival at the Smithsonian, where she was asked why she always writes historical fiction. And she said, it's because the story's already there. All I need to do is develop my viewpoint. And then somebody asked, how do you balance your research with your writing? And she said, I only research what I need. I never want the research to dominate the writing, which I found a really interesting comment. And then as one side point, she said she used to go to the dump and pull dead animals out and go and strip them and look at their bones, as well as Jess did. So she was sort of a progenitor of her own character in that respect. And then she said she's now writing nonfiction, but her next book of fiction will be about a piece of furniture. So that was a couple of insights from her discussion from, I think, last year.
Thank you for that. It was really helpful. That puts that more in context. Teresa, you have the last thought before I close out.
This is unrelated to the book. Jerry, who is that? Who are you holding there?
This is my newest grandson that was born in December.
Oh, he's so cute.
This is Dakota Ridge.
Hello, Dakota.
Hey, Dakota.
Hello.
He's adorable.
Wave yet?
Yes.
Say thank you. And my oldest daughter had my grandbaby, our granddaughter. She had her 2 months early. And she weighed in at a whopping
3 pounds and 15 ounces.
Oh,
Wow.
my.
Wow.
But she come home after a week to show you how good God is, because we started praying. She went to the doctor for a sonogram and they rushed her to Wake Forest University. And they ended up doing an emergency C-section on the 18th. And she came into the world not needing oxygen, no breathing aid, no feeding
Wow.
tube.
At 3 pounds,
Yep.
an itty bitty thing.
Because she's a girl.
Woman power, that's right.
Girls are born with more developed lungs.
I showed my friend.
They are. the
Don't
boys.
tell my husband that. He'll tell
And
you that
boys.
already.
Yeah.
Are you reading audiobooks to her already?
You know I am. All my babies get read to the day they are born.
Good. Start them early.
Yeah.
Start them young.
Oh, congratulations.
beautiful.
Thank
Mazel
you.
tov.
All right.
Mazel
I've
tov.
had
Mazel
2
tov,
eye
yeah.
surgeries this month, and I've had a new baby come into the world. So March just turned out to be a crazy time for me.
It did indeed.
Oh,
But I'm truly blessed. I love every minute I get with them.
Yes, indeed.
awesome.
All right, I
He's
don't want to keep you
adorable.
guys any much longer. Just-
Congratulations, Jerry.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank y'all very much.
congratulations.
Thank you very much.
3 quick things. Number 1 is next month. It's not really historical fiction, but we're going to call it that because it's basically taking a book that was written historically a long time ago, called David Copperfield and Barbara Kingsolver's book, Demon Copperhead, will be our read next month. And she is on the schedule to join us on the 27th of April.
Oh, wow.
Good.
I know. I thought Christine, we almost passed out when I said that. Just saw her back. Well, like I said, she's on the schedule. I was told by her publicist that she's really busy and things could change, but that's where we are. So will be great if we have her, and I'm looking forward to it. And the following month is lessons in chemistry, and I'm working with the author now to get her to join us as well.
Another great.
That's item number 1. Item number 2 is, I have a list and trying to figure out who on this list shows up, the book club list that shows up here regularly, and making sure I've got right addresses and stuff. So I sent everybody socks. If you did not get a pair of socks, if you did not get a pair of these socks in the mail, you need to direct message me and give me your new address. Because
They're wonderful.
yeah,
Love
because
the
I tried and I got a bunch of red packages that came back from people with bad addresses. So,
Oh, no.
so email addresses and physical addresses don't necessarily work. So if you didn't get one, please make sure you let me know. And
Well, I'm sorry. I'll share mine with you. Okay.
okay. And then the last thing, just really quick, I'll let you guys go, 'cause I'm already behind. And you guys, I haven't even shown this out yet. I haven't even announced the cover yet, but look what I got in today. The arc from my new book.
Happy.
Yeah, I mean, it's the arc. I mean, when I saw some blank
That's
pages, there were
amazing.
some spacing issues, I almost mortified, but I remember it's an arc, it's okay.
Right.
But yes,
Yeah.
there's the cover.
That's
You
amazing.
see that? It's called Veil of Doubt.
Wow,
It'll be out October 10th.
fabulous.
It'll be both paperback and hardcover. They're doing a really limited run on hardcovers. They want to try to, bookstores now like paperbacks apparently a lot better.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's out. So
That's
there you go.
fantastic. Congratulations.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
Sharon.
It's not the cover I
Wonderful.
wanted, but the one that I liked, they said made it look like a horror film. So I was like, okay.
I like it.
Yeah, we'll read it. We can
Oh, well.
read it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys. I'll see you next month,
Thank you.
27th. Barbara
Thank
Kingsolver,
you.
God help us, and the creek don't rise.
Hope
Thanks,
everybody's
Sharon.
weather improves.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Hi, Sharon.